Just off a busy country road near Brentwood, Essex, lies a hidden concrete and steel nuclear bunker. Entrance to this complex is through an innocent-looking bungalow, which connects to a 100-yard tunnel and takes the visitor inside a shelter that rises 128 feet on 3 floors, and all contained within a man-made hill. Built during the early 1950s, this shelter could accommodate 600 government officials in the event of a nuclear strike. It was decommissioned in the early 1990s, and today the bunker is a museum of the Cold War, and perhaps more succinctly, an epitaph to the age of mass paranoia. As this structure is now being advertised for paranormal ghost hunts, I decided to make a visit to draw my own conclusions. Here is my own guided tour and reflections of that. Passing through the first set of blast doors, one is drawn through a series of corridors that lead to many offices and rooms in this anthill-like structure. Each area had a significant role to play in the running of this vast complex, and the first major area I came across was the Telex Communications Centre. Lined with banks of teleprinters, these noisy machines would have brought early news of any nuclear incursion, whether in Britain or abroad. It's worth remembering that each teleprinter was equipped with its own telephone line. Across Britain there were other but smaller command centres which would have sent all their received data directly into the Brentwood bunker. Any censored news would have then been relayed via BBC radio studio, which was housed very close to the communication centre. Do you know, I'm pretty sure that lady does look like Margaret Thatcher. My next stop was the Military Command Centre, which was originally open through all floors with viewing galleries above for military personnel. A lower ceiling was later installed, making this area a long compact room. Sadly today there is a small military presence here, which consists of a uniformed dummy who appears to be suffering from the advanced stages of constipation. An interesting exhibit is a machine called Audrey, which is an acronym for Atomic Weapons Detection, Recognition and Estimation of Yield. This was one device which fortunately was never used in conflict. The power plant was the next step of my journey, and what a huge monster it proved to be. Audio recording here, however, was very poor, although the plant generated actual little noise. The interference seemed to be coming from a high-pitched device, probably retained somewhere in this area. As ambient noise from other visitors and exhibits was very quiet, I decided to wander around this huge generator to try and touch into any psychic activity. As with the rest of the tour so far, I felt nothing at all. However, it was interesting, well, if you like grey painted pipes that is, that the generator was intended only to be used in the event of a nuclear strike. From the next set of blast doors, I made my way into an air recycling plant which was intended to be used in the event of a site lockdown. As illumination was very poor, I engaged my camcorder's night shot facility in an attempt to capture any orb-related activity. Unsurprisingly, there was none, which adds weight to the view that this comparatively underused bunker has very little history or psychic phenomena. There is one asset that this site enjoys, and that is the abundance of staircases for access between the floors. Bearing in mind the depth of the bunker, I was surprised to find that there were no elevators installed during its construction. Obviously, people with physical handicaps weren't included within operational requirements, unlike this section which housed the most important people. Although rather plain in nature, these rooms were a luxury not enjoyed by the remaining staff, who had to make do with military bunk beds and dormitories. Somewhere in the Prime Minister's bedroom I'm certain you'll find the PM's husband, Dennis, tucked up in his bed. My only observation of this particular room was, just how many people do you need to answer the telephones, because wherever you look in this room, there are literally hundreds of telephones. The most interesting area of the bunker was certainly the main administration area. Filled with banks of typewriters, computers and typists, this would have directed any regeneration of urban Britain from a nuclear holocaust. However, looking at some of the dummy typists, you would be inclined to believe that they were recruited after the bomb had struck. But I digress. You will notice that each wall section is occupied by administrators who would be expected to lead a nation back into renewal. Quite how these essential services were expected to operate inside a radioactive wilderness occupied by dying and mutilated people is quite beyond me. But there's one thing this bunker shares beyond doom and oblivion, and that is optimism. My view is simply this: a nation is rebuilt with skilled technicians and not technocrats, but as I'm not a politician, I naturally wouldn't understand. What's still evident around sites throughout the building are piles of Geiger radiation meters. Presumably these were intended to be used should the survivors in the bunker go above ground, foraging for food, or perhaps the odd plumber or electrician. One of the oddest displays in the entire building are these dummies dressed in ancient clothing and living apparently next to rubbish bags in what appears to be a kitchen diner. In some ways this diorama may well represent then Western attitudes about living conditions in Eastern Europe under communist rule. But on the other hand, this could equally represent the post-apocalyptic kitchen, a Victorian style of course. An area well worth visiting is the large in-house telephone exchange, which during its life offered 1,000 telephone lines to the bunker occupants. The current display, I'm reliably informed, was a complete rebuild after the old one was stripped on decommission. However, whilst it may no longer service 1,000 telephone lines, the display is quite authentic and a credit to those that reconstructed it. Again, despite the ominous atmosphere, I felt no ghostly activity around me. Nearing towards the end of my visit, I called into the sick bay area. This long, darkened room stretched from the undertaker's through to the operating theatre and a large dormitory full of hospital beds. Quite why the coffin should be stored next to the patients being treated is quite beyond me, and not particularly reassuring if you were a patient in recovery or not, as it may be. After a nuclear strike, such sensibilities would probably have evaporated when the survivors saw the state of the world above and around them. The end of the journey takes you into what would have been a staff common room, where they would have whiled the hours away in peace and solitude, whilst those above would have starved or died from radiation burns. The present use of this section is that of a cafeteria, where visitors can buy food or drink and view the ration packs that the bunker survivors would have been expected to eat after conventional supplies were exhausted. My overview of the building is that there was very little activity, if any, that could be construed as paranormal, although I was assured that any activity captured there has been residual in nature and that a workman apparently died in its construction. Perhaps activity at night is different from the day, but as a museum this bunker is well worth visiting and supporting.